Hey everybody, I'm back again and I'm talking about Haymitch's role in the Catching Fire second book in the Hunger Games series. We're taking a deep dive into Haymitch's role so that way we're fresh and we're ready for the new book, Sunrise on the Reaping. So we're going to flash forward to the end so that way we can use this to inspect everything that Haymitch does leading up. So at the end of this book, Haymitch is then revealed to be part of the rebellion, and not only part of it, he is an integral part of the rebellion. He is one of the high-ranking officials that makes the moves, makes the plans, and is vital to the rebellion. Now, going back to the beginning, we start off with Haymitch in his house, passed out on his table, drunk. Katniss comes in, sees the place is completely trashed. He does not keep up with the upkeeping of the house. It's disgusting. She tries to wake him. She can't. She has to dump water on him to wake him up. So Haymitch's mental health is still not any better. He's still at the same place he was before Katniss and Peeta won the Hunger Games. And second, when Haymitch is on the train with Katniss. Katniss makes the statement, oh, it's a little chilly in here because she wants to get Haymitch alone to talk about Snow's threat. And Haymitch picks up on that subtle cue and he's like, oh, well, let's go for a walk. And goes outside and there's peacekeepers everywhere. So Haymitch then starts stumbling around, acting drunk again, and Katniss says, oh, he's just drunk. And then the Capitol is like, oh, usual Haymitch. And they leave him alone. They don't suspect any foul play with drunk Haymitch. And then they're able to talk about the threat that Snow made. Once Katniss tells Haymitch the threat, Haymitch tells her, I hope you realize that what you did, you've now cemented you and Peeta together. You will be together. You will have to appear at the Capitol every year for the Hunger Games. You will have to continue to be in love. And Katniss realizes that she's going to have to let go of any future that she saw with Gale and has to latch on to the idea of being with Peeta. So Haymitch then talks to Peeta about having to do a public proposal to really cement this deal that they're in love. And Peeta gets a little upset about it. And Katniss doesn't understand why. And says, this is what you wanted. You wanted to be with me, so why are you acting this way? And Haymitch says he didn't want a fake proposal. He wanted to do it for real. And in that moment, it made me really feel that Haymitch does have a heart. He does feel for what Peeta's going through, unrequited love. And I wonder if we're going to see that in his book. Next stage is when Gale is being publicly whipped. Katniss intervenes and takes a whip to the face. And the head peacekeeper doesn't realize who Katniss is without all the makeup on. Haymitch intervenes and he says, what do you think you're doing? She's got a photo shoot next week. How are we going to doctor this up? And the head peacekeeper goes and says, that's not my problem. And Haymitch returns and says, how about I call up the Capitol and tell them that it's not your problem? And let's see how that works. And then the Capitol peacekeeper calls it off, stops it, allows them to take Gale away. So again, Haymitch really lays into the mindset of putting up a public front. He knows how to manipulate the Capitol. It's all about looks. Do you really want Katniss to get up here with evidence that you use brutal force on her? Do you want that? Do you know what happens to people who step out of line, Mr. Peacekeeper? Because Haymitch knows, and he used that as a weapon, and he got what he wanted. Next stage. After Katniss is upset about what happened with Gale, her and Haymitch are walking outside, and she tells Haymitch, I want to lead a rebellion. I want to get out of here. I can't do this anymore. And she then tells him about the Mockingjay propaganda. He laughs in her face and says that there will never be a rebellion and she needs to accept it. And Katniss goes and says, but what about the Mockingjay? What they keep showing the same clip every year and every year for the past 50 years. It's been the same clip. What if there really is a District 13? And Haymitch says, that's what desperate people hold on to. Mind you, he's in the rebellion. He knows District 13 is real. He is a part of it. He's an integral part. Like, this was his chance to reach Katniss and loop her in and make it a team effort, but he kept her in the dark. Once it comes up to the name draw for the Quarter Quell, Katniss is already automatically in as the only female victor. It comes down to whether it's going to be Haymitch or Peeta. And mind you, you can volunteer as tribute, but only if your name is not called. So Katniss sits down with Haymitch and says, I want you to volunteer as tribute. I don't want Peeta to go. And Haymitch goes and says, well, if my name is called, you know Peeta's going to volunteer. And she says, I want you to volunteer if his name is called. You need to protect him this time. And she kind of pleads to him, essentially, your life ain't looking too good out here. It ain't going to be any better in the games. And he's like, you're right. It sucks either way. And they kind of have a little bit of heart to heart, but you don't get like the warm and fuzzies that he's actually committing that he's going to take Peeta's place. But once the name is drawn and it's Haymitch's name that's called, he looks over at Katniss and they say that it's a deep sadness. And Peeta volunteers as tribute. Now, we know that Haymitch is part of the rebellion. He cannot do what he plans to do if he is in the games. He knows that he has to be the mentor in order for this plan to work. So why was the sadness a show? Or did he have a secondary plan that he was going to work out? But could he really work out a secondary plan if he was in the games? Because he would be in full-blown withdrawal from alcohol. He'd be detoxing heavily. He would be of no use. Probably worse than what the Morphlings were going through, if not the same. So he would not have done well in the games. He would not have been a good ally to have. He would have been more of a burden. But was there a secondary plan if he got pulled in? Who would have been the plan maker and sending all the gifts and setting up everything? What are your thoughts? We're now at where Katniss and Peeta are reviewing the tapes of previous victors so that way they can get familiar with everybody's fighting style. And they choose to look at Haymitch's tape because Haymitch was the last person to participate in a Quarter Quell. So they wanted to get an idea of what the game makers were doing. So again, I'm not going into huge detail because I really want to experience it when the book comes out. But it's very brutal, very gory. It's heart-wrenching just from the description alone. And then after it's all done, Katniss makes a statement that what Haymitch did was almost as bad as what she did with the berries. And then all of a sudden Haymitch says, almost, but not quite. So he was standing behind them, reliving, re-experiencing what he went through in his Hunger Games. He stood there quietly and rewatched it and relived it. And he was able to hold it together and keep going forward. So Haymitch, when it comes time to have Katniss and Peeta mingle with the other tributes, he tells Katniss and Peeta to get to know everybody and decide who you want to be allies with. So Katniss picks up the two people from the tech district. I think it's like Nuts and Bolts. And they're older. They're not going to be physically a threat, but they're super duper smart. And she latches onto them. She likes them. And then she meets up with the old lady from Phoenix district. She's like 80 years old. She stepped up to take Annie's place. And she's old, she's elderly, can't understand anything she says, but she can make a hook out of anything. And Katniss really likes her too. So she then goes and proposes to Haymitch if I have to have allies, I want these. And Haymitch is like, of course you want the weakest links. Are you serious? And she goes and she says, well, if I can't have them, then I don't want any allies. And Peeta and her are in agreement. We're just not going to have any allies. And then that's how they end the training. But before they go into the Hunger Games, Haymitch has his token advice, stay alive. And then this is where it really gets deep, as he says, remember who your true enemy is in there. We know it's not the other tributes, it's the Capitol. That is the true enemy here. Once they get into the games, Finnick immediately approaches Katniss, and Katniss sees that he has jewelry on that Haymitch was wearing. So that is a subtle mark by Haymitch that this guy has my stamp of approval. You need to stay with him. Because again, they can't communicate through the games, but this was a sure sign again of Haymitch being intelligent and knowing how to work in codes that Katniss can pick up on. So Finnick has the little old lady from his district, and she's there, and that's who she wanted. And then later on, the other girl who is loudmouth and hates everybody, she's dragging nuts and bolts up there to Katniss. She goes, here you go. You wanted them. You got them. Now we're allies. I did what Haymitch says. I brought these two to you. We're allies. And Katniss is like, oh, so this is how Haymitch is going to work this. Because she did not have Finnick or the other girl even on her radar as possible ones, because they were younger and a bigger threat to her. So she did not really mark them as possible allies. But Haymitch, being the great mentor that he was, and behind the scenes as a rebellion leader, went and got his friends, his allies, and fellow rebel leaders to swoop in and keep Katniss in the dark and ensure her survival. Now, Finnick actually performed CPR on Peeta to revive him because he actually died. And once we get to the very end, where the big move happens, the force field is taken down, the extraction takes place, Katniss is taken up, and Peeta is left behind and captured by the Capitol. After she comes out of her, I guess, medical-induced coma or sleeping, Haymitch tells her that was always the plan. You were the one that we were going to save. We only kept Peeta alive because we knew that you would not be able to move on without him. You would just quit. So we kept him alive purely for that, and he's been captured by the Capitol. And Katniss freaks out, claws his face up, and cusses him out. And Haymitch cusses out right back at her, and it's quickly realized that she put her trust in the wrong man. And we close the book with Haymitch betraying both the kids. He has no family left. These two were the only ones in District 12 who were making sure that he got up, cleaned, had neighbors, and was around people. They were even keeping alcohol aside from him in case the supply ran out. Like, they were looking out for him. They were true friends to Haymitch, and he betrayed them. And when Peeta was put up in front of Caesar and had to give his statement out there across all the broadcast and asked, was Haymitch a betrayer? He says, I don't know what his role was, but I should have never trusted him. So, Katniss was betrayed by Haymitch. Peeta was betrayed by Haymitch, and they both hate him. We end the story with Haymitch being in District 13. There is absolutely no alcohol available to him, so he is going through a hardcore detox process. He's in the medical ward because he's not doing well. He's forcing himself into withdrawal, so he's not doing very well. And that is my summary of Catching Fire. Stay tuned for the final review of Mockingjay. I look forward to discussing it with you all further.